Welcome to Tattered Capes, where we explore the best of aging opportunities and the potential they hold for our future in a fun, meaningful, and engaging format.
Even though our capes might be a bit tattered, the superhero in all of us has a lot more resilient living to do. Catherine Owens is the owner of CLO Consulting, a trusted aging well authority and advisor in innovative senior living solutions.
I'm joined by Scott Fulton, longevity expert and owner of Home Ideations, a national leader in living environment design.
Welcome to today's show. We've got another special guest. This one's special for another reason. It is Dr. Patrick Roden. Patrick and I go back to 2016. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Patrick and Catherine kind of were sharing some stories before we started here, and I think we're in for some fun, don't you, Catherine?
Absolutely. I just am so excited to learn from you, Patrick, to hear your stories, and just appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Catherine, and hello.
Let me give you a little bit of a backdrop on this for people to have some idea of where Patrick comes from. He's a native of Oregon, spent the first years of his life crawling around on floors of a nursing home where his grandmother was the head nurse. That conjures up all sorts of images. He feels the experience imprinted and influenced his life's work. It was his chance meeting with 85-year-old marathon participant Mavis Lindgren in 1992 that set Patrick on his current path, acting as Mrs. Lindgren's medical escort for 5 marathons, changed his view of what was possible with age. Patrick's nursing career has spanned over 3 decades, including ICU, CCU, trauma care, inner city public health, YMCA, cardiac therapy, and post-surgical recovery, meaning he touched most places in the hospital and beyond. In 2010, he was awarded the Lloyd Grimes Award for Excellence in Nursing from Linfield College School of Nursing, the first male ever to be awarded that prize. He's a first-generation college graduate with BS in nursing, master's in adult education, and holds a PhD in gerontology. He's a Fielding University Creativity, Longevity, and Wisdom Fellow Human and Organization Development Scholar recipient in recognition of scholarly contribution. Amongst many other things, he's also a certified aging in place specialist, and certainly has devoted a lot of his time in that area, which is really where Patrick and I first intersected. On the personal side, he's interested in everyday athletics, aging in place, the aesthetic appearance, and vintage 4-wheel drives. Patrick loves older adults, especially women, and I'll save his thoughts on that because I think we're going to dive into that a little bit. And recently authored a book, Women, Aging, and Myths: 10 Steps to Loving Your Long Life. Patrick, welcome. I can't tell you, I've been gnawing at you for a while to do this, and I'm glad you finally. I wore you down. I strong-armed you. So
You definitely did, Scott. Yeah.
So we're going to go hard on you today. You made it difficult for me, so I'm going to really get you on the hot seat, and Catherine's going to make sure that we turn the burner up full.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Catherine, why don't you start us off today?
Well, Scott, paused a little bit in your bio. As I was reading through it, there was something that really stood out, and it was you love older adults. And having my career spent with older adults, I can understand that. But you put especially women because they have an earned presence. And I loved that thought, but I wanted you to expand a little bit on that. And then we're hoping you would just jump into your background and how you got into gerontology a little bit.
Like old things, old people, I feel that they do have an earned presence. They've been around a while. They've had a lot of experience, and like older cars, there's a greater differentiation as you get older. Young people very much are the same. They follow the same patterns, do the same things. Older people do not. They follow their own different drummer, and they're more interesting to me. And I've always loved older women, my favorite demographic. For a while, there was an AI image floating around. It was in a coffee shop, and there was this older woman, and she's has a couple cups of espresso in front of her, and she's with her dog, and they both have their heads back, and they're reeling, laughing. And I thought, that is my heaven. If I could die, take me today, I could spend the rest of eternity with that old woman and her dog. So I love older women. I grew up around older women. My family was a matriarchal family. I've been around old people my entire life, and they're just my favorite demographic.
I love that thought. You and I were talking just previously before this show, and having worked with older adults, I love the stories. I love the stories, and especially women, because for me, becoming an older woman, really, they paved the way for me. I'm a strong, independent, thought-provoked woman, but it always saddens me how much I see them just feel like they have nothing left to contribute, or kind of shrink a little bit, like they don't have a story. And when I start talking with them, how fascinating their stories are and the contributions that they've made to their family, to society. And so I love that they have an earned presence. And I think if there's anything that we can do for older women, it's to just celebrate that earned presence. So thank you for that. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%.
I think,
100%.
as you mentioned there, Patrick, there's a really common theme, and I was writing about it in my book too, is the influence of grandmothers on people, particularly males in healthcare. I'm specifically thinking of a number of physicians that I've run into that are really focused on essentially the elements of aging, and all the different ways we come at it. The number who say their grandmother was a really strong influence, or really around this positive role model around what's possible. It sounds like when you say she was the head nurse, describe what kind of head nurse you recall her being, or the narrative you created of her now.
I'll give you the narrative, because there's a mythology in a positive way. She came over from Ireland. Her name was Eileen Morgan. She was a fiery red-haired lady, and stern, very strong. And I don't remember a lot about her, but the imprint was there. It was early. So yeah, the matriarch is a big theme in my life, and the influence has lasted a lifetime.
And is that so? You kind of started with that impression, which I think I kind of have a similar route. Your route
Yeah.
was more direct, but in terms of getting from there to gerontology, what was that? Give me an idea what that journey was that ultimately said gerontology is where my calling is.
So this is amazing. Great question, by the way. Emerson said, when you were on the right path, untold forces will come to aid you. You'll meet the right people. You'll be in the right place at the right time if you are on the right path. When I look back and do life review, when I think of all the things that have happened that have set me to this point right now, it is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And the word is destiny. It was my destiny. So let me tell you the story of how I got into gerontology. I'd like a little time to unfold it, because it's a pretty miraculous story.
Please, yes, please.
So I want to ask you two a question. Do either of you believe in love at first sight?
I think there's an element of, maybe I'm not sure about the label of love, but the connection at first sight is maybe the way I would describe it.
Okay. Catherine? Love or connection at first sight?
You're putting me on a hot seat, Patrick. So as far as relationships with partners, I'm going to just have to say no.
Okay.
If I think to your question, love at first sight, after you just talked about unfolding forces and destiny, there have been times where immediately this is me, this is where I'm supposed to be, this is this is it. So context, of love, but as far as relationships, no.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Beautiful. You both did the heavy lifting for me. So I want to begin this story. Now, you guys know I was a nurse and I worked in critical care for most of my career. So in Portland in the early 90s, if you were a critical care nurse, a hotshot critical care nurse in the city, you got to do a lot of events like the running events, the 10Ks, the marathons, the air shows. You got to be the medical staff for that. Well, I was working up at OHSU in the trauma center at this time in 1992. And I got to volunteer at the Portland Marathon. And they stationed me at the 18-mile mark. So whoever came to us at that point had already gone 18 miles, right? So it was a beautiful October morning, as it is in the Pacific Northwest. And as the day wore on, we got just kind of minor calls, blisters, dehydration, those sorts of things. And then really late in the day, I got a call in the EMS services that said there was an elderly woman down around the 18-mile mark. Keep a lookout for her. And I remember, you guys, this is a long time ago, 1992, right? I was a young man myself. And I was thinking, elderly, how elderly is elderly? In my mind, I was thinking 50, because whoever it was, they were running a marathon, right? And they'd made it to the 18-mile mark. So I was thinking possibly 50. So I kept waiting. Nobody fitting that description came by, nobody. So I strapped on my first aid belt, told the rest of the crew that I was going to run upstream and see if I could find this person. So I rounded the corner about a quarter mile up. There's a water station, and there was a young woman leaning over, attending to this really elderly woman. Now, you guys remember what Mother Teresa looked like, right? Think of Mother Teresa now, spindly little legs with purple lacquer tights, shorts pulled over them, a tank top and a number on her, little wrinkly arms, about 4'8" or so, 4'9". And so I walk up and the young woman sees my scrub top that identified me as medical staff. And she started explaining what happened. She said, this little lady had gotten mixed up with these runners at the water station, got knocked over. And she fell, hit her head, and hurt her wrist. And I immediately went into triage mode. So I could see down the top of her head because she was 4'8" or something. I could see she had a little strawberry on her head. But that wasn't what concerned me. I looked down at her wrist, it was really disfigured, and it was starting to turn color and swell. So I'm cracking an ice bag and I go into triage mode. I start to put it on her wrist while I'm introducing myself. And this is the first thing this little lady ever said to me, and I never forgot it. She looked up at me and she said, young man, I'm going to finish this race. And she was super determined. And you guys, we had 7 more miles to go, right?
Yeah.
And I looked over at the woman who was tending to her, and she kind of smiled. And I thought, I got to get her to the first aid stage. So I told the young woman, I said, I got this. So I put the ice pack on. We start to walk to the first aid station. I looked down at her, and I'm not proud of what I said next. I've come a long ways, but I looked at her and I said, how old are you? I was like disgusted. And she pointed to her chest and she said, I'm 85. Every year, my number is my age. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean every year? And she started to tell me her story. I got so involved in her story, we walked right by the first aid station and they're all going, what's going on? I said, I'll tell you later. So we kept going. In that 7-mile stretch, there were signs. Go, Mavis. Mavis, you're our hero. Middle-aged women were coming up to me and saying, can we talk to Mavis? She's our hero. We want to be like her when we grow up. And so I knew there was something really unique going on here, and I was sort of in the presence of something special. So we do the 7 miles, we cross the finish line together, and it's mayhem, right? There's newscasters there, the sports reporters are there. They wrap one of those silver blankets around her, put a medallion on her neck. I'm still trying to hold the ice pack, and I'm looking for the ER doc who was at the main first aid station. I'm panicking, looking for him. And the cameras come up and they started videotaping her. And they said, we understand you took a fall. And this is something else I'll never forget. She looks in the camera and she says, well, I got tripped, fell down, hit my head, and she hits it with her other hand. And she goes, never hurt a thing. And so again, I'm off camera holding the scythe back. So finally got the ER doc. We get her shipped off to the emergency room with her family, right? And then at the end of the day, I'm filling out the report. You guys, I'm driving home after this. I'm trying to process all this. And I'm thinking, this was crazy. So the thing is, I was trained in the medical model, and I was trained to see aging as a disease. It was a diagnosis. Everybody I saw that was old, they were either institutionalized in care settings or they were in critical care. So it's a sample bias. These were sick old people. So it's called biomedicalization of aging, that views aging as a disease process. And when I met her, it just blew every concept of that out of the water. I'd never seen anybody like this do this. And so I started thinking, if it's possible for Mavis, is it possible for the rest of us? And that's where I came up with this idea of possibility aging. So the next morning, I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was just spinning. The next morning, phone rings. Pick up the phone, and it's the organizer of the marathon. And he thanked me for what I did. And he said, you know, Mavis is running royalty. That's the term that he used. He said, this cannot happen again. Would you consider being her escort for as long as she wants to run the Portland Marathon? And I signed into that right away. Now, we ran from nine, let's see, she was 86 at the next marathon. And we would start at 4 a.m. and we'd do the whole course so we could finish when everybody else finished. She did 4 more marathons. And her last marathon, she was 90 years old. And her family wanted her to quit. And I was her escort for that. Her 2 grandkids came along with us, which was quite amazing. But remember Paul Harvey used to say the rest of the story? Well, there's a rest of the story. So that's not the only part of the story. So it turns out that in 1960, in Eugene, Oregon, there was a young kid who was a track member on the track team. He had an idea for a shoe company, and he wanted to design this new shoe and start this company, but he didn't have any money. And there was a dentist in Eugene, Oregon that had a little bit of extra money. His name was Lindgren. So he put up about $5,000 to help this kid get the shoe company off the ground. Well, you know who that kid was? Phil Knight. And the company was Nike. So Mavis's family goes way back to the very start of Nike. They were the ones that actually put the money up to help get this company off the ground. So Phil would sponsor Mavis to run all around the world. When she would run with me in the Portland Marathon, a month later, she'd go run the New York Marathon. And Fred Lebo, who organized the New York Marathon, was her escort there. So miraculous. On her 90th birthday, Phil made a pair of Air Mavis running shoes for her to finish her last race on. And she wore them about halfway through the race and her feet got sore, so she changed them out to her old shoes. But that's an entanglement that was so interesting. But there's more to the story. So Mavis told me this years ago that when she was 62, she was a nurse and she retired from nursing and she got pneumonia, 4 bouts of pneumonia in 3 years. And she knew that this wasn't going to be the solution to her problem. So she needed to get moving. So she lived in Loma Linda, California, a blue zone, right?
Yep.
She was also Seventh-day Adventist, good health practices. She was a vegetarian all her life. So she walks with her church ladies in the morning for a while and realizes this is not going to cut it. She needs to run. So she leaves her little church ladies every single day, goes out in the country with her dress on and runs. Now, when a car would pull up, she would stop and walk because in that era, this is part of those women and myths, women were not supposed to break a sweat, particularly in this religion. So when the car would take off, she was telling me this, she would start off running again. She did this, you guys, for 10 years. She trained on her own. At 72, her son, who's an ENT physician, talked her into running her very first marathon. This is when she started her career, you guys, at 72. It was in Hawaii, I believe, but that was her very first marathon. She went on to run 90 marathons in her career. The last one was with me. Now, growing up in Loma Linda and being a Seventh-day Adventist, she was very good friends with Jack LaLanne, another famous fitness guy. Same philosophy, same outlook on life, right? They were doing it before anybody else was. And speaking of that, remember Ken Dykewald's first book, Age Wave? This was the Bible. This was the primer, breaking all kinds of new ideas out to the public. Mavis was focused in that book. He mentioned super agers, people who were going to be doing extraordinary feats at advanced ages. He mentions Mavis Lindgren by name. And I got to tell him this story years ago in Washington, D.C., when I was giving a talk and I met Ken for the first time. So it's an absolutely amazing story with lots of twists and turns. But you guys, I never could view aging the same after this. And so this caused me to go into a program to study gerontology and study a different kind of gerontology. But I want to stop here. I'll continue with this, but any comments or questions or, I mean, isn't it amazing? Again, right place, right time, right person. All the things had to just lay right into place for me to be there, meet this person that changed the total course of my life. I mean, I fell in love with this person and what she was doing.
Yeah,
So
so I think you and I know kind of running histories and different
Yeah.
things, but as as I think of everything around endurance sport, it puts you in touch with things that most people would never realize. One is just because an exposure function. You spend more time doing certain things than others might do. So that just the odds are you're going to see some things, but it's and the other is, so it's interesting you mentioned Jack LaLanne. We were just did a show around somebody who's done work with writing the book and movie coming up, and I met Dr. John Westerdahl down in, I don't know if you know John at all, long time relationship with Jack LaLanne. So it's like, so you've now completed the triangle around Jack LaLanne. Although he's no longer with us, this is his legend.
Well, his famous line was, "I can't die and ruin my reputation."
Yeah,
I thought that was fantastic.
But yeah, you need these moments that you just can't walk away from without seeing the world different, right? And I think that's whatever it is when it happens. I think to me, it's like, I think we talked about, Catherine, about this recently, about something like when you feel the goosebumps, just stop everything.
Yes.
And listen to what that story is telling you, or the experience is telling.
Yes. So back to your question, love at first sight. I love your story about how you got into gerontology, because that was similar for me. It was not until I, by mistake, which I now call luck, got into working with older adults that the cliche of I finally knew what I wanted to do when I grow up, that I was where I was supposed to be. And it was the first time that I had a very convicting sense of purpose. I knew I was meant to be where I was. But we also talked, so you mentioned possibility aging. That was something that really stuck out with me, because as Scott and I were talking, you hear all these successful aging and aging well and all these terms that everybody uses. And I had never heard possibility aging, but just reading that made me think of so many people that I've worked with, because for 20 years of working with older adults, you see the Mavises, and then you also see people that have chosen different paths. That I will always think of a lady that I knew that was 103, and she had a child that was in a nursing home, and a child in assisted living, and a child that had died, and she never understood why, but it was her lifestyle. And it was that. So I really want you to finish your story, but I want to get back to the possibility aging, because I think that just goes back to everything with Tattered Capes, and what it is that no matter what age or what is going on, there is possibility in how you choose to age and to have how you choose to have quality of life.
And I'll get into this later, but think about it. She bucked all norms in her culture, in her religion, in her field of medicine. I mean, they could have kept giving her antibiotics, but she knew innately that wasn't the answer. And the other thing about, you guys, it was like spending 6, 7 hours with Gandhi every time I would do this. I mean, it was like Christmas and everything wrapped up, because I just loved being around her. And like with Gandhi, they said, my life is my message. With Mavis, it was the same thing. This was really her mission. It wasn't about her. It really wasn't. When you really sat down in quiet moments and talked to her, it was about showing other people what is possible, but also she had a real strong faith in an afterlife and a God. And this was sort of her mission. She would use it as a vehicle. So, like I've always said with longevity, it's a byproduct. There's so many people who are trying to seek longevity directly with anti this and anti that and anti-aging and creams and potions and snake oil and all this stuff. The people who are on purpose for something larger than themselves, longevity just follows as a byproduct. And that was the thing about Mavis. That was another lesson. I watched her and I just said, I mean, this woman she's otherworldly. There's something else going on here that's driving her. She wasn't trying to stay young. She was aging well within her age. It wasn't about anti-aging. She really didn't care what she looked like or anything. That wasn't part of it. It was a bigger mission in her life. So again, that's one of the components that makes what you could call a successful ager.
So this kind of goes back to the statement earlier that they have an earned presence, and she clearly had an earned presence.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were talking about prior to the show, is how many women, when you start looking at their stories,
Yes.
really, they buck the norm and they change the course of history without even realizing. Just as an individual, I grew up in a very religious home. And so this is a whole nother show and a whole nother topic I want to dive in about Mavis, with her religion and just her training, how she would stop because it wasn't what she was taught, yet she was living this religion and it was a big part of her life. But those are the things that fascinate me.
Oh, that's so interesting, Catherine.
So I would love to just, this isn't today's show, but how you get past not feeling like you're going against the grain, but yet she still felt convicted that this was her purpose. So that, to me, those are the people that fascinate me and the stories that fascinate me, because I think that's what we get conflicted with so much in life.
This is such a good point. Such a good point. I remember sitting on the couch with her like a year later, her telling me this story. And you're right. She went against the tenets of her religion. But I think what she was doing was getting her messages from God. That was the message she was getting. That was her mission. That was her heroic mission in life. She heard the call to adventure, the mythological call. And all of us hear it. Some of us answer it. And our lives take off and we infect others. Some of us don't. They ignore the call and their life becomes pathologic. She chose to listen to the call, that greater call. So beautiful point. Thanks for making it. Hadn't thought of that before.
And I was thinking of the timing of this too. And something else I wanted to talk to you about was some of the changes that we've seen in aging, and so I'll kind of preface it with I think where you really started off with indirectly was the things that you've seen in aging. So you got imprinted very early, and most of us who have work in this space had the same experience, and so we tend to watch things associated with aging with a different eye over a longer period of time. And just before we go into that, I think that's, I'm just reminded, it's one of those places where we have, I'll call it an unfair advantage, right? Which is why I'm always keen to bring gerontologists forward, because they see the outcomes. That's what you're talking about with Mavis, right? It was about not the goal, it was the outcomes ultimately resulted in certain things that, you know, the longevity goal, if someone has it, you know, longevity is an outcome of these things.
Yeah.
But so we have opportunities and insights to experience these people in person, or certainly much more, you know, in a circle. I get to interact with you on a very frequent basis, and I'm privileged to do that. But I recognize
Likewise.
most people are not. And so we have more data to draw upon. And so as I kind of step back and ask the question, what's changing with the aging experience? And I don't mean what's in the headlines. I'm asking Patrick, the nurse, who's been on the front lines, kind of watching this unfold over decades. You made some mention to me recently when we talked, and it was around some of the changes that's happening that you're seeing in terms of who's presenting themselves at the hospital when, you know, I'm asking about like early onset diseases and things. Is this just headline stuff, or kind of what's really going on the front lines
Well,
here?
I'd like to say we have the burden of insight, you and I. But I want to answer your question, but let me back up just for a second, because this is really important. This is a point I really want to make. So meeting Mavis caused me to go into gerontology. And you guys, another right place, right time. I was at Portland State University at the time. So I entered, they were one of the very few schools. There was only about three: the Andrews School of Gerontology, Florida Atlantic University, and Portland State had a graduate certificate in gerontology. Portland at that time was one of the only cities, well, it was the only city in the United States that was picked for the age-friendly cities study done by the World Health Organization. The only American city chosen. And the reason, partly, was because of what we now call environmental gerontologists. These people were on the cutting edge of environmental gerontology at Portland State. There was only one other guy who started that, the first environmental gerontologist, M. Powell Lawton. And he developed the ecological theory of aging and environmental press theory. And he was out of Philadelphia. But these guys, you don't know how lucky I was to be there. These people were groundbreaking in aging in place. That's where I learned the term, bought the domain in 2000. But that's where I learned all of this stuff. But as I went through my course of study, there were two main themes in gerontology. There was historic gerontology. That focused on decline and pathology. It was predominantly controlled by the medical model. Again, the biomedicalization of aging. It took a look at what went wrong, the pathology of aging, and focused on that treatment. So aging to them was a diagnosis. And that, it goes way back to Plato and Galen. And I could get into the history of that. We probably don't have time for that. But they were the vital force people, that you had just a limited amount of energy in your lifetime, like a battery, and you used it up young. And this is the bad thing about the gendered nature of myths. They thought women aged quicker because of childbirth and menopause. And in old age, you were supposed to rest. Where do you think the term rest home came from? Remember how your grandmother was sitting in a rocking chair? You would go get her a glass of water. You rest, honey. Let me get that for you. That was the exact opposite of what we were supposed to be doing, what Mavis was doing. That was all gerontological history coming out of the late industrial model, the peak and decline model. We were all looked at like an old Buick. You had a good run, and then things went into steep decline. There was nothing you could do about it. Well, what I found out when I went to Portland State, there's a whole nother kind of gerontology, you guys. Have you heard of critical gerontology, critical theory? you heard of that?
No.
Critical theory came out of the Frankfurt School, and it was a lot of philosophers that were trying to, this is postmodernism. What they were doing was looking for a new script. They were pushing back on old narratives. Critical gerontology took critical theory, which questions cultural assumptions about anything. Feminists used it in the 60s for women's rights. Minorities have used the same template for gaining equality. So you're looking for truths that are hidden in the overculture. Let's just call it the patriarchy. Just keep it simple here. So one of the best examples of critical theory in gerontology was Betty Friedan. Are you familiar with Betty? Never heard of Betty Friedan?
Story. I've heard the name, but not the story.
Okay, so your audience, please look up Betty Friedan, especially you young people that might be listening to this. Betty Friedan was one of the main drivers in feminism in the 1960s. She wrote, I'm going to use the word the Bible, just the primer of feminism called The Feminine Mystique in 1963. She took critical theory and used it as the theoretical scaffolding of feminism. 30 years later, as an old woman, in 1993, she wrote The Fountain of Age, which is the best book I've ever read on gerontology. It is dog-eared, it's thick as a Bible. She took that same template and pushed back on ageism. 30 years apart, same woman, just she wanted to know truth behind these narratives that weren't serving us well. So that's critical theory. I'm going to look at my notes here just for a second. Critical theory, by the way, it's the underpinning of everything I do. Everything. My books, my website, my journals, my living, the way I live my life. It's questioning the cultural assumptions about aging and pushing back. Mavis pushed back. Mavis was a critical theorist in gerontology. She pushed back on these narratives. So what we're looking for is truth. And the thing is, and Catherine, you talked about this, what this uncovers is human development, not human decline. If we go with the old historical model, which people did for decades, it was human decline, not human development. They didn't look at a life course perspective and what was possible. So this is a huge, huge component of gerontology, is critical theory. And my mentor, just lucky, my external reader, my PhD, was H.R. Moody. He literally wrote the books that I was studying. And just so happens, he was one of the leading thinkers in critical gerontology. And I learned everything I know from him. So you can comment on this and we can get back to your last topic. Do you have any thoughts, you guys? See how important this is?
Yeah,
this is huge.
Like this to me is what I've one of the reasons why I latched on to you so quickly in 2016 was the elements of what's missing from the conversation. Everything you're talking about here.
This is the theoretical underpinning.
Yeah,
it is.
That kind of touch in a little bit on certain pieces of, but not as a scaffolding or a framework.
Yeah.
Around the aging experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Critical theory, but I also wanted to say critical thinking because
oh my God. Yes.
It's just I watch people and growing up religious, and this is why I pinned on that part with Mavis, but you just are taught how to think. You are taught how to think about different things depending on whatever societal realm you're born into, but giving yourself permission to think, I would say even question first, giving yourself permission to question or to think, how does this apply to me? Or how does this apply to what I want or what I don't want? Because that whole theory of just decline, I mean, across the board that you said, people have used this template for so many things. It applies to so many things because it's like, how does this apply to what I want? Not what I have been told I want or what I have been told I should be doing or what society thinks. I mean, I have a grandson. I want to be that influence in his life. And I want to be, racing, having train races. He's 5 years old. I'm exhausted every day that I spend with him.
It's like a blender without the top on it.
Yes, but I
Yeah.
look at the patterns in society, even within my own family. I'm one of 9, and I have a twin sister, and I think we are the closest in environmental, in DNA. We are the closest that two people can be.
Yeah.
And we are so completely different in how we've aged, how we think. And so I don't know, there's just there's so much to think on this, but it just fascinates me because we have to stop and give ourselves permission to think differently, or to think in a way that resonates with us and not how we've been raised or taught. Or
Very well said. Yeah. Thank you. Very well said. Absolutely.
Okay, I just want like a day to talk with you, Patrick. This is not going to be enough. Our 45 minutes is not going to cover Patrick.
So I guess we should probably speed it up a little bit here. So let me get to your question, Scott, which is a good one. As the aging process, it has been a repeated cycle historically. And that's true historically, but it has changed. And I'll mention a few of these. I think for the baby boomers, they've been really, unfortunately, introduced to gerontophobia because watching their parents age. And gerontophobia, for those who don't know, is the fear of aging. And it's been a shocker for baby boomers to watch their folks grow old in many instances because of lifestyle of our parents. It was the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. I ran across an ad the other day. It was Ronald Reagan, and it's Dutch, and he's wearing a suit. He's got his shoulder pads and his grease slicked back hair and suit, and he's smoking a cigarette. And he's signing cartons of Chesterfields to all his friends for Christmas, right? That was a good thing he was doing for his friends. Well, it was suicide on the installment plan is what it was. It wasn't really a gift, but we didn't know better. Our parents didn't know better. They'd come home and have the 2 martini lunch, which, turned into dinner and drinks, and just down that path. They were also exposed to culture. They were living under the mythology of historic gerontology. When you get to a certain point, why even try? There's no effort even needed. You're going to slide down the slippery slope. So why try? Just party on. And then they were exposed to a lot of environmental hazards. TV dinners started. The speed culture just was getting started there with microwaves and that sort of thing. So just a lot of chemicals in foods, chemicals and pesticides everywhere. So they were living in an toxic environment at that time. So all these things culminated in what's called secondary agers. Secondary agers are things that speed up the process of aging. You got primary aging, which is what we do naturally. And then secondary agers are just what accelerates that process. And the thing about secondary aging, it's about choice and control. So you can control some of this. In my career in ICU, I really, toward the end, I started to see maybe 80% of people were there because of lifestyle choices, secondary agers. And we would see acute exacerbations of chronic conditions over and over and over again. And Scott, one of the big changes, I'm going to mention the negative one first. I'll talk about some positive ones. But the negative change that has happened historically with aging, and you talk about this a lot, the changing disease states. We have gone from chronic disease, from acute disease. 200 years ago, if you got pneumonia, you were dead in 2 weeks. Remember, they called pneumonia the old man's friend. It relieved you of the ills and suffering of aging. Yeah. And so everything was acute. Now it's all chronic. Remember that post I did a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, the 2 women that I saw that first out of the gate the other day in the clinic? The first one had 52 separate comorbidities on her problem list. The next woman had 21.
Just repeat that because it bears repeating.
I know. This is what
what a comorbidity is, just in case people
the public doesn't understand this. A comorbidity is a disease that's chronic. You don't cure it, you just manage it over long periods of time. And what's odd about this has never happened in the history before. People know what they're going to die of a decade, 2 decades ahead of time. This is odd. If you have diabetes, that's probably what's going to kill you. If you have congestive heart failure, that's probably what's going to kill you. And some of these are lifestyle related, they're preventable, which is sad. But comorbidities are just things that you have on your disease list that you're living with, you're not curing. So 52 and 21, and this, you may think this is not common. Talk to healthcare practitioners. And these poor doctors, like at Kaiser, they get 15 minutes with you. How are you going to tackle some of these things in 15 minutes? Like metabolic syndrome. How are you going to get at that in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. You'll get a script for something and get sent out the door. And the next thing you know, you're on a prescribing cascade because you need another med to take care of the side effects of that last med. And pretty soon you're taking 8, 10 meds a day, which most people are now.
So
And
Patrick, this kind
just
of
on that point,
yeah,
if
this
you
is not a
step-
good way to, this is not a healthy way to age. So that last conversation.
Sorry, can I just interrupt Patrick for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah,
Because everybody is always so quick to beat on the system, right?
right,
We all know
right,
that. And
right.
lots of times it's justified. But just forget about the causes, but kind of put
Yeah.
put yourself in the position of having to treat this person.
Oh yeah, oh I
presenting with
know.
all this, right? And
I
how
know.
do you stand a chance of success? Like what? So all you can do practically is if I can pick 1 or 2 things, that's about all realistically anybody can do. But the system is so good at kind of dragging you through. And we call therapeutic management, but
So that is why I just read a statistic yesterday that 50% of healthcare workers, doctors and nurses want out. They want out. This isn't what they thought they would be doing when they got into this. I mean, it's disheartening and dispiriting for a lot of these people.
Yeah, because I don't know any doctor who went into medicine with the idea of managing. They all went into with the idea of curing. And sorry, Catherine, I'm not going to cut you off again. I apologize twice now.
That's okay, Scott. It's okay. This is just one of those topics. I want to back up to the 52. And you had said, going back to things that the secondary things that we can do.
Yeah.
Because I'm a firm believer in and we just did a show on this, Scott, but it's the hard work. There's things that we can do if we truly want to manage or improve or prevent, and it comes back to lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
But the quick answer is the pill.
Yeah.
Is give me another pill, which causes, the few times I've gotten prescriptions and I just read the possible side effects, death, but
I know. Yeah.
To me, it's like,
all of them.
I don't want it, but I also watch because I have personally been able to overcome things by diet change, lifestyle change, reducing stress, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I have close people in my family that choose the opposite path of just accepting that this is now what I'm going to live with. And that's how they manage it. But to me, it's just the part of the aging that people, I don't know how to get that message across is there are things we can control. There are things that we can influence, and I can't say control, but maybe influence is a better word. And maybe that's where you go back to the possibility aging. But I get devastated at 1. I can't imagine 52 or 20 or anything, but to the healthcare workers that, what I love about what I do is I feel like I get to impact people's lives in a positive way. And if you can't do that all day long, day after day, you're not influencing or impacting in a positive way, I would want out as well.
In many instances in intensive care, especially towards the end, I felt like I wasn't curing anybody, I was prolonging death. Because these people, a lot of them were what we call frequent flyers. They do fine, especially around the holidays. You'd have baked ham, a lot of alcohol. It wasn't the holiday, it was the day afterwards or the week afterwards, when all this stuff started to come to roost, and it would be literally a tsunami of all these people with chronic disease coming in with acute exacerbations and needed to be treated acutely in intensive care. And you'd get them through that fire, and they'd go out and come back a month later, a week later, and this over and over and over again. And those are the changing disease states. So that's one of the negatives with aging right now. And Scott, I just got to mention this. We were laughing about this. I did a stint down in South Florida, and I worked in a trauma center down there. And this is really sad because I looked at the way people retire. It is horrible. And particularly for men, retirement's been called the rollless roll. So these guys would spend their life in the Northeast. Maybe they worked at Detroit all their life, and all they could think about was retiring south to Florida. And this is what drove them in those last few years, that last mile. And so they wore their bodies out. A lot of them, when they got down there, didn't last a year because they just beat themselves up. And by the time they got down there, their bodies weren't available to them. The other bad thing about this was they had left careers, friendships, hobbies, maybe a support system. They had no way to derive meaning and structure in their lives. So I told Scott this, what we saw, and this is a term that I coined, they took on sick careers. They got real busy being sick because it gave them something to derive meaning from. Somebody was paying attention to them. You try to get together with them on Tuesday. I got a doctor's appointment. How about Wednesday? No, I'm going to a physical therapist. Saturday? No, I'm picking up some pills. Their whole life became devoted to this decline model. And I'm saying what's bad about this, we can't have a generation of baby boomers, 70 odd million, that have sick careers. We can't afford it. It's going to steal from other generations, limited healthcare dollars. And it's just not a good way to age. I mean, why not turn that energy into something else? That's why I've always pushed purpose. More purpose, less pills. I mean, that's been my motto for decades now, because I saw this happening. These people would sit in the waiting room and they go, you got it so bad. I should have it so bad. And they'd be going back and forth, and they'd get into competitive complaining, like it was an Olympic sport. And this is what they did for a living. It was a disaster. And so we have to push back on old narratives, so this one doesn't become the predominant.
I love that you say it's about purpose. So often one of the fears that people that I work with, when they look at making different lifestyle changes as they get older, is loss of independence. And what I've come to realize is more often than not, it's that loss of identity. And it's that loss of having a reason to get dressed every day, having an opportunity to feel like I still contribute to something, I still add value. And it's interesting because people wait, and I see this as they wait till they have a problem or they need someone to take care of them, to get help or to put things in place. And for me, it's like, what are you putting in place that's going to allow you to continue getting up every day with a sense of purpose, having opportunities to contribute time and talents and all of these things that we think it's about medical only. And that's the part that goes back to the spirit and the sense of purpose and identity. To me, it's that fear of losing who I am, what I bring that's of value, all of those things. And so now all you have to do is focus on, and the guest we had the other day, his book was Damned by the Diagnosis. That is what people let define them. Like you're saying, it's this sick career of, I have this, and so I need to go see that. And, woe is me. And I really hope that's not my purpose and what drives me out of bed.
Well, and the medical model is part to blame for this. They've created dependency in these folks. They have. I mean, there is a dependency ratio there, and it's an industry that needs experts.
When I ask people a lot, describe a typical day to me.
Yeah.
And how sad it is when it's like, I have to go to the doctor. I have a doctor's appointment. Their social becomes going to the doctor. Their social becomes seeing the nurse at the doctor's appointment, whatever it is, but that's not the typical day that they should be wanting at any stage in life.
It's not a good model. And it's not a sustainable model. Okay.
I'm going to jump in here now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want a short answer to this one, Patrick, and then I got a follow-up question.
Okay.
So I asked you kind of on the long time frame from working on the front lines, just so you kind of answered it, but I want to get the short version just so no one's confused.
Sure.
Because we're all hearing, we're all living longer and life's great. So from someone who works on the front lines, what's your take on it? Is from an aging experience, are we doing better? Are things getting more challenging for those who aren't aware, right? To kind of going along, trusting that the system's taking care of them.
We live in a very toxic culture. I mean, the powers against aging well, because we still live in a culture that adores youth and glorifies youth. And so the cultural message we're getting are not good. Like Catherine said, you have to be a critical thinker. You really have to question some of these narratives and push back on them. That's why we are all part of the solution. But I'm hopeful that there are some paradigm changes happening, and there's a sense of urgency. We have to get the message out. And this intergenerational battling, hey, boomer and all that, what the younger generations need to understand that there are baby boomers who are paving the way for their better experience of growing older. So we need to do this together, not factionally, but together, because the powers of commercialism are just, they're overwhelming. The messages that people are getting bombarded with minute by minute, online and everywhere. So we've got our work cut out for us. I'm hopeful for myself and my tribe, but I hope the message becomes one of culture, because we are aged by culture. Margaret Mead said that, more so than even sometimes biology. So we need to unroot this and then lay down some new thinking.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing evidence of, not that we're at critical mass yet, but certainly a trending starting to happen of, okay, folks, this really is serious.
Yeah.
There really is opportunity, but not kind of just following along the way we thought we were going to.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to shift gears for a minute here, and I want to just kind of take a moment to talk about your book,
Sure.
Women, Aging, and Myths. For those of you on the video on YouTube, you're going to see a whole bunch of Post-it notes in here. And just in the interest of time, we're not going to try to cover the whole book, because I think that's really doing it a disservice of someone who wants the enjoyment of reading it. And I chose, so even though the book centers on women, because you've had so much experience there, there's one story in here that I tabbed Jim.
Yeah.
And if I asked you the story about Jim, do you remember writing the story about Jim? And if so, will you kind of just give our listeners the story of Jim, because it's just a really neat story.
Jim was a blind artist that I met in an inner city laundromat. He had his nose buried in a book by James Hillman called Blue Fire, which is one of my favorite books, by the way. Jim was a blind artist who taught me to see. And I know that sounds strange, but it was like my Tuesdays with Maury. He lived in my neighborhood, this little tiny house that was, every time, you never stepped in the same river twice. Every time I went over there, there was something different about that house. And he was a World War II veteran, was a bazooka gunner. He was gay. He was a teacher and an extraordinary human being who taught me so many lessons about aging. And I remember he told me, I'll do one story real quick. And this is a metaphor for life. And there were two, but this is one that I really liked. I have the the art piece hanging on my wall. His sister one day gave him this very delicate Vietnamese porcelain bowl. And he was washing it, and being blind, he accidentally dropped it in the sink, and it shattered into 100 pieces. And he looked at it and he thought, oh Lord, what am I going to do with this? And he spent a lot of time in France in World War II, went to the Sorbonne, lived with a window looking out at the Eiffel Tower. Amazing stories. So he went in and out of French culture with alacrity. And there's a term that he used called échec à shell. Échec à shell, essentially a ladder up. It literally means a ladder up. So the colloquial way we would say it is taking lemons and making lemonade. So what he did, he gathered up all those pieces and made the most beautiful mosaic out of it you could ever imagine. It was broken, and in those broken places, that's what made it special. But he was a divergent thinker. Artists are divergent thinkers. This is what my next book is going to be about, aging and creativity, the things that I learned from these aging artists. A divergent thinker would think one way, throw it away, it's broken. A convergent thinker would think, a convergent thinker would think one way, it's broken, throw it away. Divergent thinking, what else can I do with this? And really, in aging, I think that's a good metaphor. I've got these limitations. I'm not all about happy gerontology. I'm a realist. There are things that do go away as you get older. Lots of things. There's a lot of loss. The term aging itself connotes loss and change. But there's a way to take that loss and make something beautiful out of it. And that was the lesson I learned from this blind artist, Jim.
I love that. It's goes back to a mindset, I think, too, that can really trap people, is the I can't versus I can. And I say that because as you were talking, I used to run 5-minute miles, and I was a runner and I loved it. And then I have, through a lifetime of lung issues, never smoked, nothing, but I was really upset because I couldn't run, and I had to change my thought process to what can I still do? I might not run a 5-minute mile. I can run a 10-minute mile, or I can at least walk. And I think sometimes celebrating what we can do, what can I do with this now instead, that mosaic piece versus it's a bowl, there's still value in it, and there's still purpose, and there's still a way that it can serve, but that, what can I do? We're going to age, our bodies are going to change.
You are so good, Catherine. Oh, I want you as my partner.
Okay. Well, we'll talk after this.
So you are exactly right. You were exactly right. There was one artist who had a tremor, essential tremor. He couldn't do the figure anymore. So instead of giving it up, it's called selective optimization with compensation. He decided what he was going to do was lay down masking tape, paint over it, pull up the tape. It put him in a whole new genre of artistry he would have never discovered had it not been for that limitation. So it's what comes out of these limitations. Some people could view aging as a limitation. Some people view it as échec à shell. And I take this to a greater awakening and a greater understanding and maybe a greater purpose. So that's the message.
I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway message from this, because that's been my experience as I've got older.
Yeah.
Well, yes, some things get slower, but you realize I could not have had the capacity of the thought that I have today, right? And ultimately, what gets us excited?
Yeah, that's the beautiful trade-off.
Yeah,
it really is. And we want to help more people see that. I mean, come to that realization. It's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, because when you spend a minute, right, you talked about people that impacted you, and I think, Catherine, you said the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Is they take your thought to a new level.
Yeah.
That you could, when you're young, you're still doing the groundwork, still preparing for
exactly
really what's about to happen now.
And this comes beautifully full circle. That's the earned presence. You've been through life, you've experienced loss, and you've created meaning from the loss. That's the earned presence of these people. That's why I love being around them.
Mhm.
Full circle. And again, the theme in this is critical gerontology. Push up against the cultural narrative, the overculture that's telling you one thing, but maybe you're experiencing something else. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust your own aging. That is one of the main themes. Mavis would not have had her magnificent purpose had she believed what the overculture was telling her. She pushed back. And I'm one of her devotees. I am a byproduct of her critical thinking, thinking outside the box. And her legacy lives on through me. So this is something we should all think about, all of us.
Can I
Sharing
share a
these
quick
things.
story? You make me think of a woman, Lou, and I have spent my life with working in senior living, but I'm a huge believer on putting in place at every stage of life what you need. But the critical thinking and the thinking outside the box, we were talking about baby boomers, reminded me of this gal named Lou. And I was opening this, brand new state-of-the-art independent living community that's providing all these quality of life opportunities. And I met with a daughter who really felt her mom needed to move here, and she would have this just incredible quality of life. She needed social opportunities, all of these things. Lou came in and she was probably close to 75. And I started asking Lou about things that she liked to do. And she golfed three days a week.
Mhm.
And asked her, I said, when did you start golfing? She says, when I was 72. She
Yeah.
actually hated golf because she resented golf because her dad, that was his life, his world, and she felt like it took away. And so
Yeah.
that started this whole other path. But she started talking about, she met with the girls every week. She walked X miles a day. She had this certain diet. And her daughter is looking, going, you don't need to be here. In fact, her daughter realized she had been thinking of her mom completely differently. And she realized her mom was actually the example of what her and her kids should be doing in their life. But she had kind of coined her mom as, this is how old you are. This is a place for you. This is where you can go and have this quality of life. She didn't need to be there. She was living her best life. And she was pushing herself outside of her comfort zone with golf. She loved it. She loved it. And she had to let go of her way of thinking about it and what golf represented in her life. But sometimes I think we get caught up in how we're supposed to think, not only of ourselves, but of our parents or whoever else it is, on how they're supposed to behave. And I know my daughter's been telling me how I should behave my whole life. But no, I
Yeah.
love this. I love this conversation.
And as you get older, that was one of the beauties of getting older. You learn to trust that inner voice more. When you're young, you question it. You're looking for peer acceptance, peer approval. As you get older, that inner voice, that inner knowing becomes a little more listened to.
And
And
it's
that's
not
again,
a midlife crisis.
oh
It
God,
is,
no, no,
but that's how it gets defined. And we
absolutely.
can talk about this book even more, but
Yeah,
it is becoming aware of yourself
yeah,
and the desire to become aware of who you are.
yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
Well,
So
Patrick,
Okay, Scott, we'll let you
I
talk.
am. I'm hoping we can get you back to dig into some of these a little bit more, because I know there's a lot more stories here, but also it is a rare treat, and you are a rare person that I fortunately, you kind of talk about when you met Mavis. I kind of not nearly as dramatic, but I just remember when I met you in 2016, and I was like, oh, this guy, he's got something to say that I'm not hearing anywhere else, and it was really important. And so you're sharing some of you with us today. I can't tell you how honored I am and grateful for all that you've been doing in investing, obviously continuing to learn, right? And
now,
just
is this that I love you, man point? in the conversation.
Well,
I love you, man.
We're kind of spread across the country here.
We are. But
we-
Scott, I feel exactly the same way. And what a bonus I've got to meet Catherine, with just a lovely thinker and a lovely person. So yeah, I'd love to do this again. There's more on the table here that I could talk about, without trying to be real scripted. But did you want me to mention three takeaways?
I'd love it.
You can cut it out if you want. But just there's three things I want to leave your audience with. Two of them are physiological, one is cultural. And I'm doing the physiology because of you, the lifestyle medicine stuff. We didn't really get into that, but I think these are really important messages. The first one has to do with leg strength and mortality. So your audience, if they could do one thing for themselves or a loved one, work on leg strength. The literature is robust in this. My own experience with my family members, when they lost the ability to ambulate, their care complexity went up exponentially and their lives were shortened when they got wheels. So, and leg exercises are really easy to find on the internet, but number one, leg exercises. Number two, right in there, is daily novelty and complexity. From the Successful Aging book a long time ago, Rowan Kahn, through good research, the MacArthur Foundation studies, 80% of people who lived past the age of 65 had two things in common. One was obvious, whether you smoked or not. The other one was a lot less obvious. It was the degree of complexity in your daily behavior. The more complex your daily behavior, the longer you lived. So if you go to the same restaurant every weekend, go somewhere different. If you drive home the same way every day, go somewhere different. Shop the same stores, shop somewhere different. Build it in every single day. These are choice points, and they are cumulative. So complexity and novelty in your daily behavior. And the last one is sociological. We are aged by culture. We've talked about that. Only if we agree to it. You don't have to agree to it. That's it.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Patrick, it has been an absolute pleasure to meet you as well. Scott has shared so much about you and just the things that he has respected and loved and enjoyed about knowing you. And I can see why. So thank you so much for this. This has been a real treat.
Thanks for the two of you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks much.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Tattered Capes. To learn more about the show, visit tatteredcapes.com and subscribe on your favorite platform. Until then, stay curious and remember, the superhero in all of us has a lot more resilient living to do. See you on the next show.